We're delighted to be welcoming 4 new members to Shakespeare Survey's Advisory Board. Dr. David Sterling Brown, Dr. Carla Della Gatta, Dr. Vanessa Lim, and Dr. Harry McCarthy. We'll hear from each of the new members about their own scholarship and their future involvement with survey, as well as leaving some time for audience questions. But I'll now hand over to Emma Smith, General Editor of Shakespeare Survey.
Hello, thanks Emily, and it's a great pleasure to be here to talk briefly about Shakespeare Survey, past and present, and then to hand over to our colleagues to talk about Shakespeare Survey sort of present and future. I should say how pleased I am to have some of our other advisory board members on this call too. I can see Claudia Auk, I can see Hester Lees Jeffries, Lena Orlin, and my predecessor as editor, Peter Holland. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about survey as a journal, as a publication, perhaps so that it might give you a sense of where we are, where we're heading, and whether we might be a good place for you to think about publishing your own work. So Survey is an annual publication. We're just collecting for volume 75. So it's been going since 1948. And I think there are three key aspects of Survey that have been there right from the beginning and which will continue. One is placing a kind of value on accessible style. Survey still has circulation in some high schools in the UK and beyond. It's often the gateway critical journal for the wider penumbra of people who are interested in Shakespeare and in Shakespeare studies. So we value a style which is accessible but precise and sophisticated. The second is that we've always been interested in performance, and I think one of Survey's most sort of compelling additions to, particularly early in its life, to the critical landscape was the integration of performance and other forms of literary criticism. And we have in every issue a roundup, a review roundup of Shakespeare productions in England and Wales, and an occasional roundup of productions further afield. So if you want to read up in better times about what the Royal Shakespeare Company or the National Theatre in London have been doing, Survey is the place to go. And thirdly, and this is something which is slightly changing now, and our current panel attests to that. I think in the past, Survey has looked from its home in Cambridge, published by Cambridge University Press from the start. So from its home in the UK, has tended to look east rather than west. That's to say, it's always had representation and circulation in the rest of Europe, in India, in Japan, and in the kind of wider interest in Shakespeare beyond the Anglophone world. It has traditionally, but this is changing, had a bit less reach towards America, so a bit less reach west. And I think that's changing. That's something we are keen to change, and we are keen to develop the subscription model that we can talk to you about afterwards if you want to understand how that might work for your libraries. What I value about Survey is its eclecticism, actually. We publish on a theme for each issue. So the theme for volume 75, which we are accepting submissions for through the summer until September, is Othello. And by Othello, we mean sort of everything about and touching that play, from history, textual matters, adaptation, critical approaches from all different parts of the literary critical field and beyond. We think about these topics broadly and in permissive and expansive terms. We want to be surprised and expanded by the submissions that we get. And we hope that the theme will be able to draw together a whole range of writing from people at different career stages, and importantly from different positions in the Shakespearean and geographical world. That eclecticism, of course, as for most journals, has been more limited perhaps than it should have been in the past. Like I think all journal editors, we were brought to attention by the Race Before Race Executive Board's call to action to journals to stop being gatekeepers and to examine themselves and their own practices in terms of what they exclude. And journals have always made a virtue, haven't they, of what they exclude somehow being somehow the measure of the quality of the journal, than the numbers of things that are excluded. It shows how good the journal is. We've really thought about this, and will continue to think about it, to think about what we can do for scholars of colour and for their work, for junior scholars, for early career scholars, for precariously employed scholars, how we can make our submission processes more transparent, more responsive, and more enabling. In the past, Survey had a pretty low intervention editorially. That's to say, we would accept or not an article pretty much as it stood. And if acceptance was the verdict, then that was great for the author. I think what we are moving towards now is a more iterative submission process, where we can work particularly with junior scholars, with early career scholars, or people who are publishing with us or in the journal world, perhaps for the first or early times. We can do something more iterative in our reviewing process to help develop and shape those articles so that they are ready for publication. That's something which is changing right now, and which I'm looking forward to working with colleagues on the editorial board, new and old, to implement. So I think my job is to remind you about Survey, to encourage you to take a look at our recent volumes, to think about whether you have a piece on Othello that you might want to submit to us this year, whether you have a piece for the next volume, 76, which will be on Shakespeare's virtual and digital. And also to think about us for other pieces which don't fall under the theme, up to about 10,000 words in length. We have each year we publish about 26 articles, 27 articles in a volume, of which 2/3 or so are on the theme, and a third are a general roundup of interesting work that's been submitted. So if your work doesn't fit the theme, but you still think that Survey would be a good place for it, do send it to me at any point during the year, and we can begin the conversation about that. And one other new thing that we are trying, you won't be able to see this in any of our previous editions very easily, but we are keen to experiment with this if the need is there. We'd be interested in publishing clusters, small clusters of work on a particular subtopic or an approach. These might be the kinds of come out of the kinds of papers that would be on a panel together at a conference, or that would be a group of colleagues who are thinking through some adjacent themes, perhaps particularly if they are emerging. That's to say, they're not the kinds of theme that we would yet have identified as a theme for a full edition of Survey. So please do think about Survey as you're thinking about a good fora for your own work. And do think about some of the specific things that we publish that might be useful for your students. And particularly, I would point to those performance reviews currently done by Lois Potter and Peter Cohen. I'm going to now pass over to our 4 new board members. We're going to go alphabetically, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. What they're going to do is talk to you about their own work in their own way. So, David Sterling Brown. David, can I hand over to you?
Thank you so much, Emma, and thank you all who are joining us today. I'm excited to be here and also be part of the changes that are happening at Shakespeare Survey. And so I am a Shakespeare and pre-modern critical race studies scholar. I am an assistant professor of English at Binghamton University and State University of New York. And in addition to Shakespeare and pre-modern critical race studies, I am also a big proponent of anti-racist scholarly activism, which essentially goes hand in hand with pre-modern critical race studies, as well as Black feminism, domestic criticism, and the household, and also whiteness studies. In addition to that, I really enjoy both teaching and also producing pedagogically oriented work. And so some of the things that I'm working on right now in terms of my scholarship include a special issue of Shakespeare Bulletin that I'll co-edit with Sandra Young on Shakespeare, social justice, and performance. I also have a monograph that I'm working on that deals with the Du Boisian color line and whiteness. And then I'm in the process of editing an Arden collection on skin for their Critical Intersection series. In terms of what I'm looking forward to as it concerns being a new board member, last week we had a brief call with Emma, and she mentioned that if we want, we can shake things up. And that's something that I love to do. So I'm excited to have the invitation to help shake things up. And one of the things that I want to see, and so I'll be looking forward to seeing pan out, is this commitment that Shakespeare Survey has with having at least one piece in the volume be open access. I think that'll be a really great opportunity for allowing people's work to shine. I also am interested in supporting and helping to support the work of early career scholars, as well as other marginalized folks in the field, including scholars of color, trans scholars, queer scholars, et cetera, because I think it's important as we, reflect on what Emma just mentioned about the journal's eclecticism, but also the need for it to do and be better. I'm excited to, again, be a part of that. In terms of what I enjoyed about past issues or volumes, I'd have to say, one, the heterogeneity of just what's inside of the volume, I think is incredibly interesting. There was in volume 70 a roundtable sort of conversation that was there on writing and rewriting. And I think as we move forward, sort of inspired by the eco studies and race panel that that just happened at SAA recently, collaboration is really, I think, key to sustaining the field and also to generating new ideas. And so I'm really excited and hopeful that there will be more collaborative pieces in the issues in the future. And then lastly, as far as what I'm keen to facilitate, again, given my anti-racist scholarly activism, I really want to make sure that from top to bottom, we see that pan out in the pages of the journal, and keeping everyone accountable for producing scholarship that is in various ways anti-racist, whether that's thinking about citational practices or just the nature of the scholarship itself. I think it's really necessary to not just answer the call that was made by the Race Before Race Executive Board now, but to continue on a sort of full-time basis as we move forward from this point on to address the issues with gatekeeping in the profession. And with that said, I will turn it over to Carla.
Hello, my name is Carla Delegata. Thank you, David. I'm currently an assistant professor of English at Florida State University. I teach drama across different time periods, including LGBTQ drama, Latinx drama, Shakespeare, of course, Jewish American playwrights, any type of drama across the periods. Prior to this, I was assistant professor at USC for 4 years in theater, and there I also obviously taught drama classes as well. My background is in theater, and I have a certificate in gender and sexuality studies. And my commitment really is to art. And that is, when I use the word art, I mean it kind of most broadly. Primarily, I deal with live theater and performance, but any type of art making. I'm interested in how we write about art and how we talk to different communities, including in ethnic studies and in theater studies. We aren't just writing about a community, but we also write for a community. So that even in our scholarship, we are writing for artists and being able to communicate dramaturgically, sonically, visually, all the different complexities that go into art making in theater. My work tends to focus on contemporary performance, but I also do work, obviously, in different time periods from the past. I primarily focus on ethnic theater. My work is on Shakespeare and Latinidad. I have a forthcoming co-edited collection with Trevor Buffone that will be out in June. And my monograph titled Latinx Shakespeare's, The Staging of Intercultural Theater, is in process. I also write for larger theater magazines, Teatro Magazine and HowlRound, in wanting to work with different publics. I was thrilled to have an essay published in Shakespeare Survey on hip hop Shakespeare's, and I was so excited that Shakespeare, that the journal was welcoming to that work, because in the past, it wasn't necessarily always the friendliest type of thing to be talking about race and contemporary Shakespeare performance. So I've always appreciated the journal's stance on welcoming my scholarship on that. And I look forward to welcoming more scholarship in that vein. I also work with theaters, and part of my scholarship has to do with the practice of working with different practitioners and being able to understand how theory is involved with practice and practice with theory. So as we go forward, I'm continuing in what David said, and I'm certain that the others will say as well, I encourage the work of early career scholars, and I had such a good experience with this journal, and part of my reason that I'm excited to be on this board is to help continue what has already been done, as well as shift and do more of that in the future. Thank you. I will pass this to Vanessa Lim.
So hello, my name is Vanessa. I am an assistant lecturer at the Department of English at Maynooth University in Ireland. I also hold a concurrent appointment as an early career research fellow at the Institute of English Studies, affiliated with the University of London. I am an early modern literary scholar and a historian of ideas, a historian of early modern intellectual culture. I completed my PhD in history and English at Queen Mary, and my background before working on Shakespeare was in intellectual history and political philosophy. So I've always worked across several disciplines. My research currently focuses on classical rhetoric in the Renaissance and how it bears for an understanding of Shakespeare's works. And so I'm currently working on my first monograph, tentatively titled Shakespeare's Deliberative Art. But I've also taught Shakespeare more generally on modules involving eco-criticism, adaptation, race, as well as more general survey modules. So I guess my academic career so far has reflected what might be called the eclecticism of Shakespeare's survey. So what I really hope to see or hope to bring to the journal as a new board member is an openness to more interdisciplinary approaches to Shakespeare, and a willingness to consider methods and questions that have been raised by other fields, like Carla and David and Emma have already mentioned. I also very much hope to encourage work from scholars from a more diverse range of backgrounds, as well as from early career scholars and precariously employed scholars. I think lots of what I've wanted to say has already been said. So perhaps if I may speak from a more personal point of view, I found it difficult and sometimes alienating, and I still find it difficult and alienating sometimes, to work in Shakespeare and early modern studies, especially in Anglophone academic communities. I present as someone of East and Southeast Asian descent, and while English is my first language, I speak it with an accent that might be considered non-standard, which reflects my nationality, which reflects my background as a first-generation scholar. And for a long time, I did not think that Shakespeare scholarship had a place for someone who looked and spoke like me. And so I really appreciate and applaud the efforts initiated by the Race Before Race Consortium and taken up by journals like Shakespeare Survey to make scholarship more accessible and approachable for all. And I hope that with more diversity of representation, we will accordingly be able to encourage a greater diversity of voices. Being on the advisory board is, I think, a great privilege and responsibility, I feel. So while I'm still at a relatively early stage of my career myself, I hope through this appointment to be of some help to anyone who may be experiencing similar struggles, and that fellow scholars can reach out to me in this capacity. So I really look forward to working with David, Carla, Harry, Emma, and the rest of the board in making the very best of Shakespeare scholarship available and accessible through the journal. And with that, I will pass over to Harry.
Thank you, Vanessa. I hope everyone can see and hear me all right. I'm Harry Mccarthy. I'm currently a junior research fellow at Jesus College at the University of Cambridge. And to date, my work has been very performance-based, which is partly why I'm so drawn to this journal and my position within its organisation. And that work on performance really straddles both theatre history as well as present day performance. And the focus so far has been on boy playing in both of those areas. As well as currently finishing a book on boy actors in early modern England, I'm also starting to pursue the difficult second album, which is hopefully going to be a project on race, but specifically whiteness and constructions of early modern childhood. So my work on boy actors has predominantly been what's drawn me to Survey in the past. It's hosted some fantastically transformative theatre historical articles, particularly by David Kathman, which have really sort of shaped how scholars approach quite well-worn questions as regards to boy playing. And my own first contribution to Survey was trying to continue that vein. So that was in the most recently published volume on the number of boy actors who trained as boys in one company and then moved to another and forged a career kind of across the early modern theatrical institution. I also have a piece in the forthcoming Shakespeare and Education special issue of Shakespeare Survey, which is much more polyvocal and much more present day performance oriented. So that's a conversation with Perry Mills, the director of Edward's Boys, who's my co-author of the piece. And it brings in the voices of a huge number of boy performers who've performed with Edward's Boys, reflecting on their educational and formative experiences of performing not only Shakespeare, but his contemporaries. I should also say that I'm very interested in what's known as Shakespeare's contemporaries, even though some of them worked either before he was born or long after he died. And work on those and their shaping influence on the field is something that I would really welcome to this journal as well. I also come to Survey from our friends at Shakespeare Bulletin, where I was first editorial assistant and then performance reviews editor. And part of what really excites me about getting to work with another journal is the advanced glimpses that one gets into where the field might be heading and the possibility of having a kind of shaping influence on where the field might be going. And I think that that's, as Vanessa said, one of the greatest privileges and also responsibilities that comes with what we do. And I really welcome Survey's commitment to helping to shape the future of Shakespeare studies. I think it's also important to remember that, as well as being a force for good in the future, Survey also has a responsibility of record in that, as Emma mentioned, it rounds up every year the performances of Shakespeare and also the contributions to criticism, so the year in Shakespeare studies, as it were. And I think that we need to be mindful going forward that those records can also be acts of occlusion and exclusion. And I won't name check anything in particular, but I've been looking back at past issues that were, where the critical roundup was written, and some what I think are quite major works in our field are not present in those roundups. And I'm thinking particularly of work by scholars of colour. And I understand that there are issues of space. There are always issues of space, but I think that we can do better in recording and also celebrating work that really is transformative. I don't personally think that a book needs to have in Shakespeare's time or on the Shakespearean stage, and whatever that might mean in its title, in order to be identified as potentially transformative to the work that we do. And that goes back to something I've written about before in the latest issue of the Shakespeare Journal, co-edited by Owen Price and Farah Karim Cooper. And in that article, I called for a more honest conversation about who historically has been given leave to speak in Shakespeare studies, and argued for a more critical self-reflection of the field, that we, particularly white scholars, that's the we I'm using, have a role in shaping. So I kind of see my role on the board as putting my money, or at least my unpaid time, where my mouth is. I also speak as a contingent scholar who's acutely aware that my non-renewable contract will end just as my time on the board is also coming to an end. So I kind of think that if I'm going to do something, I had better do it now. So just to round up, I'd really echo Vanessa's note there on more interdisciplinary and intersectional approaches. I'd also really like to see surveys' role in recording and responding to performance in all forms really maintained, and also perhaps expanding our sense of what performance actually is, as well as what gets documented. So I mentioned Edward's Boys. There's a real gap, I think, in studies on amateur and regional production, either in the UK or more broadly worldwide. And I also probably speak for all of the new members of the board as well as the current ones, but I'm really also hopeful for future collaborations with initiatives like we saw a couple of months ago with Wendy Lennon's Shakespeare, Race and Pedagogy. So I'd really encourage you, if there's an event or a series of events that you're cooking up that you think could maybe benefit from some kind of exposure, or that there's a way in which survey can work with you on that, then I'd encourage you to get in touch. And just finally to flag, mentioning the Shakespeare, Race and Pedagogy event, that we're still open for entries for the postgraduate essay prize that Survey is currently sponsoring, and we're open for entries for that until the 1st of May. And if there's a way of me dropping the link to that in the chat, then I will. But I think I've probably had more than my fair share of time talking, so I will hand back to Emma and look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks so much. Thanks all of you, and I hope that gives a sense. I didn't obviously know what our colleagues were going to say, and so I really feel a conversation is beginning and is opening up about looking with fresh eyes at what we have done, putting our hands up where we have missed or more actively excluded material, and thinking about how to make good on this sort of 2020-21 moment in thinking about survey going forward. I hope that's given the people on this call a sense of what the new members will bring to that ongoing conversation. And I'm really, really looking forward to it. Thank you all. Would anybody like to ask anything about direct a question to any of the panelists about their own work, or ask something about survey more generally? So we're going to make up our own questions.
I'll say something
For each other. David, go ahead, please.
Yes, I just want to echo what Harry said and reiterate, that I have a personal commitment to pedagogy. I very much so dislike the way that pedagogy is often separated from scholarship, as if these two things don't intersect and benefit one another. And so in the future, and I so glad that you plugged Wendy Lennon's amazing event that she did in February, but I would love to see more in terms of pedagogy, performance, and production, and just thinking about the ways that we can have that conversation be immersed in a volume, maybe even topically.
I wonder, Emma, if I know about the Shakespeare in education issue that's coming out in As Far as I Am in It, but I don't know much about the other contributions to that.
Yeah, that's great. So Shakespeare Survey 74 was meant to be in part picking up papers from the International Shakespeare Conference in Stratford in 2020, which of course didn't happen. What we've got instead is a really interesting volume on Shakespeare and education, which goes from the sort of humanist classroom. Lizzie Sandis has a piece about revenge tragedies, sort of in the university, on the university stages and on the public stages. So we go from, the education in the 16th century, right through to the role of Shakespeare in the curriculum, school curriculum in 20th century Singapore. Harry's piece on Edward's Boys and how a high school boy playing company is kind of situated within the sort of larger practices of that school. So it ranges quite widely in historical terms and in geographical ones. And it also has a number of pieces about the reflecting on pedagogy in the pandemic and on digital pedagogy. Is a piece by Esther Shupak, a piece by Kevin Cornby. And the piece that will be the open access piece from that issue is by Alexa Alice Jubin and Lisa Starks. I think Alexa is on this call, which is called Teaching Shakespeare in a Time of Hate. And it's a really important, urgent kind of call, reflective call to us as teachers and as activists and as allies and as change makers through education, which I think is going to be a great piece, and I'm very proud that CUP will put that outside the paywall. And I think David's right that this foray into more pedagogic material, more explicitly pedagogic material, that's to say, I hope will have an impact on the submissions we get going forward, so that we don't need a special issue to do that, but that some of our work on Othello might be explicitly about teaching Othello or teaching with Othello. That would be absolutely great. And I think the eclecticism that I mentioned and that Carla and others have picked up is something that we want to continue. In some ways, it makes it difficult to say what does survey do specifically, because actually survey does lots and lots of things. And that's its great strength. So I completely agree about those kind of thinking more about that issue. And Kelly McKinnon has added into that. She's teaching. I don't know how much you can see the Q&A. So I'm just going to. Don't know whether all the participants can. I think the panel can. So I'm teaching Shakespeare in early modern text to high school and university students in Shanghai in the hopes of giving them ownership of what is considered Western. I'd love a suggestion of how to integrate your publication in this endeavor. Yeah, so that's really, really interesting, Kelly, because in some ways your position is precisely the kind of position that some of the articles in our Shakespeare in education issue coming out later this year do interrogate. What does it mean to what are the burdens and the responsibilities and the limitations on thinking about Shakespeare in this canonical way, or in this way of giving access to the West? I think that what survey could offer you actually is some maybe specific work on the Shakespeare text that you're actually teaching, something which gives a flavour of critical language and the critical approaches, or perhaps one of the pieces that we've published recently on Shakespeare in China, to see whether your students who have an expertise in that would agree with what with what's being said. I remember teaching working with Kurosawa Shakespeare films with Japanese students who corrected and kind of red penned through pretty much everything that was said about the language of Kurosawa and the way the subtitles worked and everything. And it was actually a very salutary experience and a very transformative experience for me, actually, to think, instead of thinking of the expertise coming from the Shakespeare bit, in these encounters, when the expertise comes from the other bit, the other kind of experience, I think that can be a really great method of teaching.
Kelly, if I could just pick up on that use of the word ownership, I think that's one thing that I like to do with classes, not high school classes, but first year undergraduates, is to give them a passage from an article and sort of to close read it, and to sort of see, I was talking about occlusion and exclusion, to kind of think about what gets glossed over, or the kinds of terminology that's used, and particularly if as Emma's saying, you're looking at this from a native culture perspective, to see to kind of analyze some of the critical practices that are being applied by a non-native scholar to an entire kind of culture of performance could also be quite interesting and quite liberating, perhaps.
Is there anything else that anybody would like to ask of our panel or of me?
Emma, I actually have a question for you, Emma.
Go ahead.
If I may.
Please do. Please do.
So, and I'll put it in the chat as well in case other people haven't seen it, but I've watched a couple of times your video response to the Race Before Race executive board call out and call to action in terms of gatekeeping. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe speak to a little bit your motivation for responding in the way that you did, and greatly so, because I think it's important for folks to know why and partly how we all got here in the first place.
So I guess probably everyone on this call is aware of that Race Before Race article on medium.com, which was, I think, I think for someone like me, a white scholar in a privileged university environment, was absolutely shocking. And I think what's shocking about the experiences and the evidence of gatekeeping in that article, what's shocking about how shocked I was is how unshocked people with a different experience from me would be. And that's, I'm not at all trying to make this all about me, which it absolutely isn't, but realizing, God, I didn't know this happened, and realizing, but all the scholars of color I know, and I haven't asked them before, does this happen? Do you feel this happens? So I think that call to action was absolutely vital and transformative. I think it meant that things could not continue in the same way. I don't think that everything that Survey or any other journal did before was all about structures of exclusion, but I think it was often unthinking and not as expansive in. I think Carla's experience suggests that actually, when work came to us, often we were able to see its value and the part of the conversation, but we weren't active enough in seeking out that work and saying, this is the kind of work we want to publish. So I think that the whole board shares that feeling, shares that recognition, and the chance that all kinds of things about our current moment offers us to make things different. I mean, we would never have done a webinar 12 months ago, really, even though all this technology existed, but it kind of wouldn't have registered as a possibility. So we're able to, the technology in the moment is here for us to reach out and to invite submissions, but also conversation about what we're doing and how we do it. Adding to the board, thinking about some of the ways the journal operates and how they might be mobilized to support scholars, particularly precariously employed or early career scholars, and also scholars of color. That seemed to be an important thing for us to do. And I'm really grateful for, I don't know if Emily Hockley is on. I don't know if she's been able to get back.
Yes, I'm back.
Oh, she is back. She's back. Yes. I just wanted to say how grateful I am to Emily, who has also just been completely on board with this agenda and pushing us and enabling us to say, yeah, we can do that. That can be done. All that can be done too. So that's not to be self-congratulatory. There's ongoing work to do. This isn't a one-off. Here, let's appoint these new members of the board and they can do it all for us somehow. This is about the ongoing work of growing and developing our scholarship and the means by which we have of publishing it and getting it out there. And I'm really moved actually by what Vanessa said, and I'm grateful to you, Vanessa. Thank you for saying that about being a first generation scholar and about the sense, in some ways, which goes back to Kelly's question, doesn't it, about what does a Shakespeare scholar look like or sound like? And these are, it's really important that we are thinking about that more openly than we have before, and also thinking about the role. Finally, just banishing the idea that scholarship is somehow, there is an objective kind of scholarship. That's probably been the one thing which has the one aspect of literature, the one sort of fiction of literary criticism that has done most damage to all kinds of scholars, I think.
Great. I don't know if there's any other questions coming in. Just double checking. Oh, there is. I was going to wrap up, but there's one from MJ, so I'll pipe down.
So MJ's just suggested that we should be more sort of active about putting these new directions into the online mission statement, and that's a great reminder, MJ. I'll make sure that that's all as up to date as it can be. Thanks for pointing that out. And do encourage, do think about, do all of you encourage students, peers and colleagues and others who you meet to look at survey and to think about whether it might be a place that their work could get a good hearing. Yeah, Emily, I'll hand over to you for the.
Right. I'm sorry. I just want to say, thank you so much for all of that. I'm sorry I'm cutting you off, Emily. Because part of my experience with the journal was that I had given a talk, and actually Peter Holland made a comment. He's like, the next time you submit an article, send it our way. And I submitted an article that had nothing to do with the talk that I had just given. But I will acknowledge that at the time, and this is about 5 years ago, I was reticent to put the words hip hop in the title of the article. So I did not, and I called it something else, Shakespeare and Other Englishes. And so part of what I look forward to doing, and what we look forward to doing, is not just supporting the work of early career scholars and scholarship on race and gender and sexuality and so forth, but encouraging it as well. And so I think we all have different ideas and certainly different personalities and strategies for doing that. But if there are other mechanisms that the people on this call might suggest for us, I can speak for everyone and say we are welcome to those ideas, because sometimes one comment from one person and one talk from someone else is what inspires someone or makes someone feel comfortable putting your work forward. So if you do have suggestions for us in how we talk and communicate in our networks, please do send them on, because I think even between the four of us, from what little I know of everyone, we're all quite different, and I think that too will be an advantage for the journal and for the scholarship in general.
That's great, Carla. Thanks. And thanks also for the shout out to Peter Holland, who I think has done more than anyone in exactly that kind of expansive, generous, going around mentioning to people at conferences that survey would be pleased to have their work, and I'm very, very grateful to ride on Peter's coattails in what Survey is doing right now. Yeah, thanks, Carla. Over to you, Emily.
Wonderful. Thanks so much to everyone for attending, and thank you so much again to the new members of the advisory board. We're just really looking forward to the things that you bring to Survey, and to our ideas continuing to build and grow. As Emma says, this is just the start. This is by no means us coming and feeling self-satisfied that we've finished here. So yeah, looking forward to the future.